everybody. This is Dr. Diana Wiley. I am your host of Love, Lust, and Laughter. Jessa Zimmerman was my guest October 23rd, and she has written Sex Without Stress, a couple's guide to overcoming disappointment, avoidance, and pressure. And if any of you did not hear part one with Jessa Zimmerman, you may want to access the archives and listen to it because it's fascinating. And we're now going to talk part two. Welcome back to the program, Jessa Zimmerman.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
Oh, you're so welcome. We thought we'd discuss, toward the end of your book, it's chapter 11, the 9 phases of taking the stress out of sex. And you and I were in the same consultation group where Dr. Elizabeth Ray Larson taught us about the giver-receiver exercise, and you've taken that and you've really developed it in some very practical and accessible ways. So do you want to talk just a little bit, an overview of the giver-receiver and then how it impacts really all of the phases?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, right? The exercise is relatively simple, but it's very nuanced when you go to use it. So the basic gist is that people, a couple would take 10-minute turns where one person is a giver and one is a receiver, and the receiver is totally in charge. So when it's your turn to be the receiver, your job is access desire, figure out what you would like, any sort of physical touch that would be the most pleasing to you, and then to direct your partner, the giver, for the whole 10 minutes. So you really are in ownership of your own experience, and you just let yourself receive. And then you use an alarm, so that when 10 minutes is up, you switch. And one important thing to point out is that the giver is, only following instructions. You're not doing anything that isn't invited. You're not improvising. You're not taking things further. And you also have the job to take care of yourself. So you say no if you need to say no. Because I really want the receiver in this exercise to be free to ask for, literally exactly what they want. So the giver has a role here in saying no if they need to.
I have found it's a very powerful exercise, especially for couples who have not been in sexual touch for a time. It gets them back in touch, literally. And I allow more than 10 minutes. I tell them 15 or 20 minutes. Have you found it's better to have the shorter time?
Well, I mean, I just tell them do at least 10 minutes for a lot of the couples that I work with, and the ones that the book is for, right, that have been suffering with avoidance of sex and stressful.
Avoidance,
10 minutes it can feel like a really long time.
That's true.
But I
That's a good point.
I leave it to them if they're ready and comfortable to have longer turns. And another big part of the directions is not to have any expectations. There's no goal. They're not trying to achieve anything. They're certainly not, there's nothing to finish. So part of it is a practice in just showing up and having this moment-by-moment experience without any expectations.
So that incorporates some mindfulness, too, to be in the moment and to, you'll have a better time sexually if you are not so concerned with the destination. You're just enjoying the journey.
Absolutely. That's one of the 9 phases, because it's really true. There's no. I believe sex is better when it's not a progression towards a goal, but it's more, instead of a staircase, it's more like a circle. And anything that we do together is a win, right? Enjoy everything. There's not value judgment that something's better than something else. So learning to appreciate and enjoy what you are doing, without thinking ahead is important.
It is important. And you talk about in the phase 1 of your the phases of taking the stress out of sex. You mention that a lot of times when a couple's been together for a while, the newness kind of disappears. And and they have to work. The newness wears off, is how you put it, and
Yes.
and you get more comfortable, and life tends to get in the way, and all of that. And I'm thinking about Dr. Helen Fisher's work, where she, using the functional MRI. I know you know this, but let's just share with the listeners. So she found, by looking at hundreds of people newly in love, using looking at their brains, using the functional MRI, newly in love, and then people who'd been together a while, and she noticed that in the beginning there was much more testosterone and dopamine running, and dopamine, the hormone of arousal, needs newness and a novelty. And and then it changes, so you can feel like you're on speed in the newness stage. And then she claims that after about 1.5 to 3 years, it changes from feeling like you're on speed to more of an antidepressant. That that you're friends, but the erotic kind of stuff is gone, because now you're producing more oxytocin, the hormone of touch, and vasopressin, which seems to have something to do with bonding. Yeah. And have you read about the prairie and the mountain voles? VOLES?
No, I have not.
Well, it's really interesting. They're cousins. And the mountain vole is so they've looked at vasopressin by looking at these little vole creatures. And so the one that has less vasopressin, the mountain vole, is very promiscuous. He has lots of partners in his life. And the prairie vole has lots more vasopressin and seems to be bonded to one partner throughout his little vole life, and memorizes her little body and her smell and all of that. So the vasopressin is pretty important in terms of connection. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some ways, maybe we're jumping ahead to phase 9, which is about exploring eroticism, but it also brings up Esther Perel's book, that what we find attached and secure and bonded is pretty much the opposite of what's erotic. So it's a challenge in a long-term relationship to keep or find a spark again.
Yes, it is. And her book, Mating in Captivity, I think published about 10 years ago, is excellent, because it points that out, that it's very hard when you're just domestic and maybe raising children and all of that to keep the erotic spark going, because you start to feel more like brother and sister. So couples really have to have a book like yours and listen to this program and read other. And Mating in Captivity is an excellent book. And if people are, and many people are, struggling with affairs, her newest book, The State of Affairs, is excellent. And she has a chapter in that, Why Happy People Cheat, but that will take us off topic, so we're not going to do that. But she's brilliant. She's brilliant, and the fact that she speaks 9 languages and does therapy in 4 of them is pretty amazing for those. She was born in Belgium.
Yeah, I should just quit now.
I'm laughing, but that actually brings me to another point in your book, still under phase 1, prioritizing intimacy. You say laughter does wonders, and it sure does, doesn't it? I mean, I this is not original, but I say couples who laugh together last together, and it's and to be able to be silly and trust each other. And a lot of couples, it would seem, have forgotten that sex is play. You do mention the word.
By the time they're coming into your office or mine, sex has become heavy, right? This is a loaded, stressful topic, and I know it is for a lot of people. And so to counteract the hard work of addressing your sex life in the short term, remember to go out and have some fun together. Go to a comedy club. I tell people that's an assignment I give a lot of people. Go laugh. Yes,
I'd give that assignment too, because it breaks down barriers when you can laugh together and have fun. You write, and it's not sex you're scheduling. You're scheduling a trip to the playground. I like that a lot.
This is something, I mean, I get people that ask me this all the time, whether it's clients or, interviewers or something, about what about scheduling sex? And I think it's a mistake to schedule sex, because then you're building in this expectation, and that creates pressure. That's part of what people are struggling with in the first place. What you want to schedule, though, is the opportunity for sex, right? You want to create this time where you can be physically intimate without any expectation, but who knows? Maybe you end up interested in the mood, and then you have sex where you never would have had that, chance if you hadn't scheduled the time. And especially for busy couples with careers and children and things, nothing's going to happen unless you actually make time for it.
That is true. And then you write that this is another time when you have this opportunity for sex where you keep the expectations low in terms of, it's going to be hot sex with intercourse included. Maybe not. Right. Maybe it's just going to be reconnecting and letting some oxytocin flow because you're touching.
Right. Yeah, and I think we probably talked about this in part one, but this analogy I use of going to the playground.
Yes.
I like for couples to think of sex as going to the playground in the way that it's the outing that counts, not what we do once we get there, right? It doesn't matter if we go down the slide. We just go together, we play, we have fun, we do what we feel like doing when we're there, we stay as long as we want to stay, and then we go home, and the whole trip is wonderful, right? Like, that's a win. So
that's
for people
a win.
to sort of wrap their mind around that can take the pressure off, can take the stress out of sex.
Yes, and you write under this phase one, commit to it, and it's about making a habit and a commitment to show up, whether intrinsically driven or not. This is an area where you can fake it till you make it, and it's all right.
Yes.
Just that you have agreed to show up and be there and be in the moment.
Yeah, and and know that you may have a variety of types of encounters. Some are going to feel better than others. Sometimes it's going to be very challenging to show up and relax and shift gears, and other times it's going to be easy. It's okay. It's not like it has to be linear progress. Keep showing up repeatedly, have experiences, and kind of take the edge off.
Yes. And let's move on, because there is an overlap, of course, and you've already touched on it a bit, to phase two, communicating about sex. And I really like it when you write, communicating about sex has more than one layer to it. You need the ability to talk about sex as a whole. Its role in your life, your overall satisfaction, your expectations, your disappointment, and your contribution to the problems you're experiencing. That's very powerful, Jessa, and people need to pay attention to that. I think that I counsel my clients to avoid psychic sex, because a lot of folks believe if you really loved me, you should know. And I always respond,
exactly. If you were really attuned to me, you'd know exactly what I want right now. And I haven't called that psychic sex, but I love that term. It's really important to speak up and actually use your words.
Use your words like we teach our children when they're little.
Right.
But I also say, if you don't communicate, it's like going on a treasure hunt without any clues. Communication really is necessary, and I think it's necessary in the light of day when you can see your partner's face and perhaps subtle reactions. And I like it. Like, I have recommended your book. I just most recently did it with my last client, who is a physician himself, and he promised to listen to the show, at least in its archived, but he's going to get the book as well. But I think people can say, if they want to improve the communication with their partner, they can say, I was reading an article or Jessa Zimmerman's book, and I realize that there are some things that I don't know about what you enjoy in bed, and I want to create that sort of pleasure for you.
Right. I try to get my clients to understand what a gift communication is. I mean, one thing that people will report to me when they've done the giver-receiver exercise is often the person in the giver role feels such a relief that they just follow instructions. They don't have to know what to do or be in charge of this thing or perform, So people generally find it so relieving to be given the information about how to please their partner. So
that's a really
rather
good
than
point.
think, oh, they should just read my mind, I should give you the gift of the knowledge you need, the information you need to know exactly what I would like right in this moment. Because it's not the same day to day or, moment to moment.
That's right. And sexuality, as Dr. Larson pointed out a number of times, is cyclical. And especially if a woman is menstruating, she may have higher desire at certain times than other times, and parts of her body may be a little more sensitive at certain times than other times. But it has cycles, and
Yeah,
so,
I also point out to people, when we masturbate, right, we have this instant loop between and how it feels and what we want and then what we should change, to get what we want. It's all happening at the speed of neurons. And I'm sort of trying to get clients to give each other that kind of information, like how, if somebody's pleasuring you, how do you give them enough of the information? You're the only one that has that because you're the one in the body knowing how it feels right now. So trying to get that flow of information going is just crucial.
It really is. And it's also worth noting that men who are watching porn and masturbating, if they have premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction, they usually do not when they're watching porn. They don't have to worry about pleasing the fantasy woman on the screen, and they are giving themselves just the right amount of pressure as they masturbate. So that can be really, really important. And you say under communication, and I like this a lot. I actually use it too. This suggestion: reading a good, approachable sex book to each other out loud. And I, for probably 30 years now, I've done bibliotherapy, so I have about 80 articles and stuff I've written, stuff other people have written in my bibliotherapy files. So at the end of the session, I'll give them usually 3 or 4 articles, and then suggest it's a similar thing. I suggest they read it out loud and then pause and talk about it. It can be a great launching pad for more discussion.
Right. And my favorite resource, at least, or especially for heterosexual couples, is the Guide to Getting It On by Paul Giovanni.
I agree with you.
Yeah, because it's so wonderful and it's so funny. It's very disarming. So
yes, that's right, and it's in its 15th edition or something. It's been around, and then Paul Ioannidis keeps updating it.
It's 9th, but yes, it's been around for a long time. So.
It's an excellent resource, and people don't have to read it cover to cover. They can go into the index and look for their particular issues and read those.
Yeah.
Those pages. So, do you want to add anything more? Before we go to phase 3, which is pretty important, accessing desire, but. Do you want to say anything more about communicating? This might give you a little hint. I do like the pitfall that you write about not being able to ask for what you want.
I mean, it's a lot of people struggle. Like, again, if you're going to use the giver-receiver exercise to practice each of these things, it can be very challenging to speak up about what you want. I mean, first you have to know what you want, which I guess we'll talk about in a moment, but then to put it into words and to say it out loud and, to take up that kind of space, it can be really challenging for people. But it's important to get better at that.
It is, and that actually is a pretty good segue into accessing desire, which is your phase 3, and this is so important because our history and the kind of attachment we had to usually mother, but can be father too, is really important. And you write, you may have struggled to ever want anything.
Yeah.
And many of these people struggle with desire in general because you grow up in an environment that teaches you whether your desires are valued, whether there is room for your wishes, whether you can expect to have your wants fulfilled. And that's really, I'm so glad you wrote that because that is such an important point. And if you didn't come out of a secure attachment kind of family where you were heard and held and kissed and encouraged to explore the world, then that's an invitation to do some personal work, possibly finding a really good therapist where you have a good fit, and that's more doable these days than it ever has been, especially with remote therapy.
Right.
I mean, I think in-person therapy is, of course, the best, but
right.
Yeah. But talk a little more, Jessa, about families of origin and this whole business of you might have turned off to wanting anything. Because
if you're raised in a household where, I mean, there's just so many different situations where maybe there's somebody who's sick in your family and they take, all the energy is there. And so you get a message that there's not really room for me to need anything because my sister, has got cancer, or you've just got distant and neglectful parents who barely notice you, or maybe you get in trouble if you speak up about something, trauma or abuse or something like that, or maybe you just subtly get rewarded for never rocking the boat and being agreeable, and you get all this praise, and so it reinforces this idea that you shouldn't really speak up about anything. I mean, there's so many different ways it can happen, but a strategy.
So many different ways.
Yeah, lots and lots of different ways. Yeah. Your strategy might be to disconnect from your own desires. So I certainly have adult clients who come in and really can't access desire. They feel like, I'm just easygoing. I'll go with anything. There's nothing I want. And it takes a lot of work to sort of figure out, wait, there is something I want in there.
Something I want. Yes. Yeah. And I think another possibility with a family of origin that is dysfunctional is that usually unconsciously, but a parent will prefer if you kind of stay in neutral about your feelings, that you don't express real joy, nor do you express anger. These are unacceptable, and you're less trouble if you just kind of stay in neutral about your feelings. You think that's true?
Right. Yeah, I think that's true, too, right? So a lot of people learn to sort of fly under the radar, And again, it doesn't always have to just be in abusive homes, where certainly people try to do that. But even in more subtle ways, you get these messages from your family about what's expected and what gets praised and what gets, distanced, all kinds of messages like this. And that's part of why the whole middle part of the book is all those questions to go over about your family and your experiences, because there's kind of a lot to take apart in your own journey to adulthood to this moment to figure out what were my experiences and how have they shaped me and how is it relevant to how I'm struggling in my intimate relationship now.
Yes. You talk about in Accessing Desire, you talk about reactive sexual desire. Can you explain to the audience, we touched on this a little bit when you were on in the end of October, but reactive sexual desire.
Yeah, this is such an important, I'm so glad you asked me, because it's really an important concept for people, because there are sort of two different ways to have sexual desire. One is what I call proactive, which means you think about sex, you fantasize maybe, you get spontaneously aroused or interested, and I'd like to seek this out and make it happen. And that's what we tend as a culture to think of as libido and sex drive. So I get people coming in saying, I have no sex drive, but that's not really true. What they have is reactive sex drive. So for those people, maybe they never think about sex or rarely, they don't get spontaneously interested or maybe once a month or something. But if the opportunity is there and things are right, and they get what they need and they start, they're kissing and touching, and then their body starts to respond. They start to get aroused, and it's like, well, now I'd like sex. And so it's where desire, comes after arousal. And lots of people are like that. And we all tend to move to more reactive desire as we get older. And circumstances like stress and stuff like that will impact it too. But some people are like this from the very beginning. And I just want everybody to know there's nothing broken with that. It's a perfectly valid way of feeling desire. But you and your partner need to understand that and then accommodate it. That requires a willingness to start and see what happens.
There has been research that actually suggests that for perhaps more than half the population, sexual desire doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
Most have to be physically stimulated to feel desire.
Right. And it's not just women. Like Rosemary Basson is who sort of developed, she didn't use this language, but sort of had this concept. And she was describing, I think, women's desire. But there are a lot of men with reactive desire, too. So,
Good point,
I always want to point out to people, it's not really gender-based. We might have that stereotype. But it's important to realize nothing's broken. You just need to develop ways to start, create the opportunity, have a willingness, go into an encounter and see if the engine turns over. And then if it does, great. And if it doesn't, everything still needs to be okay. Like it needs to be okay with both people that, it didn't happen this time. That's all right. We enjoyed what we were doing.
We enjoyed what we were doing. So and you write about this, that you're creating opportunities for sexual desire to arise. And if they don't, but it doesn't happen, it might happen next time. But meantime, the person is getting him or herself into a sexual mode. Instead of being reactive, they're being more active about it.
Right. And they're getting to enjoy together kissing and touching and some intimate time that they might not have had. I mean, you probably hear this from clients, too. A lot of people that struggle with desire or have this reactive desire avoid sexual circumstances, situations.
That's right.
They say no way upstream because, wait, I'm not in the mood right now. And they can't quite imagine being in the mood, so they just say no, and they shut the door on all those opportunities, where if they could show up with an openness and a willingness and mess around, and some percentage of the time, they would actually end up wanting sex. But if you say no all the time, you're missing those chances.
You're missing the chances. And as some people, it's certainly true that the more sex that you have, good sex I'm talking about, the more you want it, because you're used to having all these really good endorphins and oxytocin and just swirling around in your body, and especially after orgasm, you're feeling all of that, and you're feeling relaxed and close to your partner, and you're feeling good. And then couples that don't have sex often forget about it, and it's a very low priority. And and if both people have low desire, you and I don't generally see these people.
Well,
if they both have it and they're happy with it.
Yeah, if they're happy with it. Sometimes I'll see where a couple where both people have reactive desire. So neither one of us sort of driving their sex life.
Right.
And so
that's right.
That's especially challenging to go ahead and start on purpose, from zero. And that's okay. You build up some steam and see what happens,
Yeah. I did a women's presentation group. Some woman found my website, and these were all local women, all professional women, and so they paid me, this was recently, paid me to come talk to their group, which is a group that meets, this is such a good idea, this is a women's support group. And but they all were having problems. They're all women in their 40s, more or less, early 50s, and all of them have children and are married. And they were all struggling with mismatched desire. But there was one couple, and it turns out that they're going to probably come see me. She said she had an interest in it. But she they both had reactive sexual desire, and so they weren't having much of it. And in her husband's case, there had been some sexual abuse. So that you know, and a good therapist, and you do this, and I do this. I live near a fire department, so I get sirens. Can you hear it?
Yeah. We'll probably hear it at my office in just a minute.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right. So, very important, if there's been sexual abuse, sexual trauma, the Me Too movement, more and more women are coming forward.
Right.
But that has to be explored because in severe cases, there is a form of PTSD. And so that really prevents them from being in the moment and letting go and surrendering because they have flashbacks on something that was very painful.
Right, of course. I mean, there are so many reasons to struggle with sex. I mean, sometimes sometimes I'm amazed that anybody's having, you know, enjoyable sex because there's so many things that can get in the way and make it difficult and strained. And so I really will hope the listeners will understand that it's okay if they're struggling. It's totally normal to have difficulty.
Yes, this is a la Dr. David Snarch, but I think it is fairly common that deep emotional and sexual intimacy is rarely reached until midlife and beyond. Yeah. And that requires some differentiation. And you use some, I think, didn't we touch on it a little bit last time we talked, David Snarch?
Yes, we did.
Yes. So to be differentiated requires some maturity.
Yes.
And and but it also requires some consciousness and and confidence that I don't need my partner to validate me all the time.
Right.
What did you say, Jessa?
I said self-confrontation. You know, like taking yourself on and challenging yourself to grow and stretch and get out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you do that when you have a couple or an individual? Oh, no, you pretty much only see couples, don't you?
Yeah, pretty much I do, yeah.
Yeah. But so you talk about self-confrontation.
Well, I mean, certainly...
Just elaborate on that a bit.
Well, I'm trying, you know, in therapy, I'm trying to get each person... Actually, and there's a theme in the book, too. Look at your own contribution to the problems. That's your side of the court. That's the stuff you should focus on. It's not about blaming your partner or thinking if they would just change, everything would be better. Every situation is co-created. Every time, each person has something that they're contributing to the dynamic. So it's important to, you know, confront yourself about that and get busy cleaning up your own side of the court.
Another way to put this is that they have a couples problem.
Yes.
Not just one person.
Yes.
They have a couples problem. And you mentioned blaming. I mean, blaming never works. It keeps them stuck.
Well, I guess it depends what you're trying to achieve. It works to damage your relationship and make your partner defensive and less willing to collaborate with you. But it doesn't work for anything that's constructive or helpful.
No.
Yeah.
No. You say, I also recommend that you stop having a black and white yes or no response to sex and enter into, well, we've touched on this already, but the way you're putting it is very good. And enter the gray area of maybe.
Yeah.
And this is really beautifully written and a great concept. It is important for you both to let go of attachment to any particular outcome to learn to enjoy the moment. So we're talking about mindfulness. We're back to that.
Yeah. Right.
And I have had clients who go ahead and take a mindfulness course, and that often helps.
Yeah.
And I really like... Yes.
The awareness.
I really like Dan Harris's... I'm sorry, Jess, I'm over talking you. Go ahead.
I was going to say just the awareness that mindfulness can be relevant to sex is eye-opening for people. So that, what were you going to say?
Well, Dan Harris is an anchor on Good Morning America, and famously he had a panic attack on the air maybe 12 years ago. And about 10 years ago, he wrote a book which was a bestseller, and it's still very available, and it's a wonderful book called 10% Happier. And it's about Dan Harris's struggle. Well, he's married to a physician. His parents are both physicians. He's very type A, hot, wired very tightly. And he discovered his journey was fascinating, and that's what he wrote about in 10% Happier. It's also funny. It's always fun to read a book that's well written and amusing in places.
Yes.
And so he found mindfulness, and it very effective. And if people want an introduction for somebody who had a difficult journey, 10% Happier is a good book to read. I just read in the paper that Bill Gates, who shares his books every year, and I don't have this in front of me, but he recommended a Buddhist book on mindfulness. And Bill Gates says that he and his wife Melinda are practicing mindfulness with a lot of benefits. He didn't talk about it being beneficial to sex, but you wouldn't expect that from Bill Gates necessarily. For those listeners who are not living in Seattle, where we're more aware of Bill and Melinda Gates and their foundation, but he co-founded Microsoft. But he's always liked to read. So this is, I'll have to get his book and the recommendation. But it's written by a Buddhist monk. The book, and he used to be in high tech, so it's he took quite a journey. Phase 5 in the book, I just call it learning to be present, but that basically is mindfulness, right? How do you just be in the moment with what's actually happening with the person you're doing it with? And so mindfulness practices are, a great way to approach that. And you also write, go slowly, relax, experiment with what it takes to connect with your partner and feel good about what you're doing. So true. Yeah. Slow down. I say that a lot to people. Slow down.
Yeah, right.
You wanted to talk about a little bit about, where's your selfishness one? That is, phase 7. Oh, I'm jumping ahead too much, but phase 7, being selfish, So should we talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the word selfish is usually construed to be negative. But in my mind, really good sex requires that you can take pleasure, that you can think about yourself and surrender to it and just, worry about your own experience and kind of take ownership of that. And I think, really good sex is a flow between being selfish and being giving, letting your partner do the same thing and being there for them. So it's sort of a dance and a flow. But I feel like most people struggle with the selfish part of sex. So lots and lots of people are just worried about how their partner is and how their partner's doing and whether their partner's happy. And it's like they're barely even in their own body.
I think it's especially difficult for many women who have been raised to just please, please, please. That's changing a little bit with the newer generations.
Possibly, yeah.
But cunnilingus, because to lie back and be orally pleasured is hard for some women because they have to feel entitled to pleasure and they have to focus in on all of the sensations of your lover's lips on your lower lips, and it's very hard for a lot of women to relax into that because they're not doing something. Right.
But likewise, I think there's a lot of pressure on men in our culture to be good lovers. I mean, I certainly hear it from a lot of men in my office who are so worried about whether they're pleasing their partner and is their partner doing okay and how's their performance. And, they're not having any easier time just sort of thinking about themselves and soaking up their own pleasurable experience. So, often it's both people worried about each other instead of really being able to dive into their own desires and their own experience and to give themselves that time and space to savor that,
Savor it.
I think you're a much more compelling sexual partner if you're having a great time. That's what we want for each other generally. So I think there's a lot of need to practice being selfish. And again, you can use the exercise for this. Like, really think about that and practice for 10 minutes at a stretch so that you have access to that when you're just in regular old, sexual encounters that don't have those rules.
And I think that when you're receiving the touch is the time when you can be selfish and you can speak up if something doesn't feel comfortable, because that's part of it, that you're paying attention to your own needs. And I like having the couples talk either after the exercise of giving and receiving or in between turns as giver and receiver. And I like them to use specific terms rather than vague ones, like you might replace great or wonderful with descriptions like flowing, or it was ticklish, or it felt warm, relaxing, hard, soothing, or maybe uncomfortable. And, and then do you get your clients to bring notes or at least discussion points to the next therapy session after they've done this?
Oh, yeah, because the use of the exercise, a lot of it comes in the debriefing of, so what happened for you? What was easy? What was surprising? What was challenging? What did we learn? Because, and I say this to everybody, the struggles you have in your sex life are going to show up in this exercise. This is not a detour around your challenges. It's going to walk you right into them. So let's hear about what emerged that was challenging. It's like getting I refer to it as, let's get the monsters to come out from under the bed. Let's see what we're dealing with. And then we can use the exercise to gradually, as a laboratory, to gradually tackle those things. But, talking about what the struggles are and, the successes in the exercise is what makes it really, really useful. So that when you go back again and again and again, it becomes a way to totally transform your sex life.
Yes, I think it's a wonderful thing, this sometimes called sensate focus, because I think Masters and Johnson first came up with the term and the idea. Masters and Johnson, for those of you listening that aren't familiar, they were preeminent sex researchers. Dr. Masters was an MD, and Virginia Johnson was a nurse, as I recall. But they felt that too many people were too genitally focused. So they came up with the idea.
It's not coming through, Gary?
Hello?
Oh?
Hello?
I
don't know. I did too. It's probably from the New York producer's desk in the studio. I think it was inadvertent. So we'll just carry on until we hear something.
Okay.
Sometimes people will call in with a question, and we're certainly open to that if we don't have much more than 15 minutes left. But sometimes people will listen live, and it is live.
Okay.
6 to 7 in New York, 3 to 4 here. And, So, let's see, being selfish. And I really like the way you end that phase 7 by saying you have to give yourself permission to be selfish. And to be selfish in a good way. You take up space and let yourself have a turn, and then allow yourself full access to your desires and relish receiving that touch. You trust that your partner will take care of himself or herself. That is so important, and I've been with my husband, well, we only got married earlier this year, but we've been together 8 years, and we really do have an incredible sex life. And I learned that early on from him, even though I'm a pretty well-informed woman with high sex drive. I've always had that. The bioidentical hormone replacement therapy has helped with the testosterone added. But, just to trust that your partner will speak up and say something if something isn't working, to take care of himself.
They certainly need to do that. And this is one of the points I try to emphasize with every couple. That is the foundation of trust, to take care of yourself, to speak up if you have a problem. Because if you won't do that, then your partner can't truly ask about what they want. They can't truly be themselves, right? Like, everything gets muddy and all of trust falls down. So really the most important thing you can do is say no if you need to. So rather than being, a blow or a negative thing that's like, oh, hallelujah, you're taking care of yourself. That's what frees us up to totally be honest and, pursue our desires, because I know you'll take care of yourself.
I think it's one of the foundations of intimacy, emotional and physical intimacy, is the ability to be vulnerable and to trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's kind of the foundation. So you make a very good point. Taking care of yourself is the foundation of trust.
Yeah.
But to back up, we've talked about this earlier in the show and even last time you were on, you have to know what you want. I think for men and for women, and particularly for women, it can be useful to spend some time masturbating. And and I recently read an article by a medical doctor giving lots of permission to women to use vibrators. And I found that when I was at UCLA's Female Sexual Medicine Center before I moved to Seattle 10 years ago, that women who had not masturbated as teenagers really had trouble with orgasms. And they almost always needed some extra help, like with a vibrator, which can go so much faster than any tongue or finger. And and this doctor who wrote this article said it could actually help develop some of those pathways, some new pathways. And that's the theory, that if you didn't masturbate as a teenager, those neural pathways from the genitals to the brain were not laid down. So you need extra help, the extra vibration that comes with a vibrator. Right. And there's so many good ones. I'm thinking 20 years ago, they weren't nearly, now they're quiet. They go at 9 speeds, a lot of them, the WeVibe ones. There's a new one that I love personally and have recommended it to clients, and I just happened to discover it. It's called the Bobbii, Bobbii, and it's by Sensual, and it's got a little point. It's a little bit pointed at the end, and it's quiet and goes at 9 speeds. So, and for people who are new to using a vibrator, I like the WeVibe Touch. It's, and the WeVibe website is we-vibe.com, and it's worked for a lot of women because it stimulates the clitoris, but the way it's designed, it can also help stimulate the labia. And the vestibular bulbs that are under the labia need to be, they're all part of the you know this, but I'm just talking for our listeners. They're all part of the clitoral system. So when those vestibular bulbs fill up, the arousal goes higher. So either with vibration or with a partner lightly munching on your labia, those vestibular bulbs can fill up, and it feels good. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's worth adding, since we're going into this sort of educational moment, right? We're talking about vibrators that we've used externally on the clitoris, because again, most women are going to require stimulation of their clitoris to get to an orgasm. Because I do sometimes get people who come in and they've not had an orgasm and they're trying to use some sort of internal, vibrator / dildo, thinking, this is also going to happen in my vagina somehow. But that's not the most likely way that people will discover their orgasm.
No, and that's because the clitoris's only function is for pleasure, and it has about 6,000 to 8,000 nerve fibers, and the penis has about 4, and has many functions, of course.
Right.
So, but I do say, I think, for discovering your orgasms, stimulating your clitoris is generally a good way to have an orgasm. But for women who are able to orgasm but don't have a partner and they're perimenopausal or menopausal, in order to keep their vaginal vault, their walls supple and strong, they should be using a dildo, vibrating dildo that goes inside. And that is one way that a woman can also learn to have a vaginal orgasm with stimulating her cervix or her G-spot. Those are often typical ways that women can have vaginal orgasms.
Right.
Yeah. But we're back to use it or lose it, right?
Yeah. True.
Yeah. Yes. So, let's see, where were we? Back to you. We took a little side trip there, but I hope it sounds like you were fine with it.
That's okay.
Yeah. So much a part of sex therapy is sex education, isn't it?
Yes. It is.
Yeah.
Well, I
say a few things. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say I wouldn't mind touching on the last phase, which is exploring eroticism.
Exactly. Perfect. I was just going to go there.
Okay. So I put this last because it is a little bit of a, I don't know, like other things should pretty much be working okay in your sex life. I think before you want to start to explore eroticism. But, eroticism is our unique set of things that really turn us on. It's sort of the energetics or the mental part of sex that makes it so arousing. And each of us has, some level of eroticism, some set of things that sort of flip our switch more than other things. Whether it's actual sexual behaviors or it's energetics or power dynamics or whatever it is. And to start to learn to figure out what that is for you if you don't know, and then for your partner to do the same, and then to share it with each other can add, first of all, a big spark, a lot of heat, but also a lot of intimacy. It's personal and it's authentic to really get to the heart of what turns us on and to learn to share that with a partner.
And it's about being vulnerable, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
it feels very risky to let somebody know what your sexual fantasies are, or what you really want to be doing, or at least imagine to be doing, or what pornography or erotica you really respond to. Most of us have these reactions inside and maybe just don't ever share it with anybody. But it's powerful to share that with a partner, and then to try to figure out how you can incorporate, harness some of that energy in what you're doing together sexually. It doesn't mean you have to act out the scenes exactly, although you could, but even how do you just play with some of that energy or bring some of it into what you're doing?
Yes. Very, very powerful. You write in that phase about try a version of the exercise focused on giving and on taking and allowing pleasure. And you write that consent is built into this exercise. And this is important if the person has had abuse or trauma or assault in the past. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so, in general, the giver-receiver exercise, the receiver is in charge, right? Yes. So nothing gets done to you that you don't invite. So you're totally in control, and there's no real risk of consent violation if everybody's following the rules. In the version where you're taking and allowing, it's the giver who's in charge. So that person at that point is a taker. So they're taking pleasure from their partner's body, and the other person is allowing it. So it's sort of flipping up, it's on its head, right? So the person doing the touching is touching their partner for their own pleasure. They're taking pleasure with their partner. And that requires really explicit consent because you can imagine it could be easy to be traumatized if somebody just does something to you that you don't want. And especially,
we're certainly hearing more of those stories in the last
year
plus.
And lots of people have histories like that, from very small incidents to very major ones. So for people to play with this version, you want to be careful and aware about that, and you'd want to ask explicitly, "Can I touch you like this? This is what I want," and make sure that they say yes, and don't say yes if you don't mean it. Right? This is where it's really important to take care of yourself. Say no if you need to.
And this has an added benefit in that it helps couples really communicate their desires, their wants.
Right.
And to find a voice. Use your words.
Yeah. And it gets, these exercises and this whole process, really gets both people working together as allies on a shared, like you said, a couple problem, right? Their problematic sex life is a problem for both of them, and so they can become teammates and allies and partners in really changing this, instead of feeling like maybe adversaries or like it's a win-lose situation. It's like, no, we're trying to figure this out together so it really works for both of us.
So then the dance of intimacy really is that you're dancing in the same direction, rather than one dancing away and the other approaching. You're dancing together, and you are more in sync.
Stepping on each other's toes.
Yes, that's a good analogy. That's right, not stepping on each other's toes.
Right.
And, there's, this is, oh dear, there's the music already. Jessa, I want you to come back. We have so much to talk about. Do you think you might do that next year?
Absolutely.
Great. You're so articulate, and your book is excellent. I'll write it up, and we'll give everybody the link so that they can find your book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Jessa Zimmerman. Sex Without Stress. Bye-bye.
Happy feet, happy feet.